Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a product of 1960s Coolidge Corner, just outside of Boston, where the butcher and tailor shared the block with a deli and 2 Chinese restaurants. She was repeatedly told that little girls should be seen and not heard. Clearly, she didn't get that message. Her adventurous spirit led her to study media at Northwestern and Emerson, where she hosted a jazz radio show. California called, and she dove headfirst into San Francisco radio and television, where she hosted and produced award-winning talk shows for decades. Her debut memoir, By Accident, launched in June 2023. She lives in California with Fred, her husband and creative partner since 1980, and their damn near perfect Goldendoodle, Moxie. Both sons and 2 grandkids are thriving in Los Angeles. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Joanne Green.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our question is always our opening question. What took you so long to write your first book?
I have a very short attention span, or so I thought. So media was perfect for me because I would write a story or a newscast or a feature or whatever, and I could see the beginning, middle, and end right from the start and be off onto the next thing. I always felt like there might be a book in me, but I just couldn't even imagine a project that would take that long and require so much rewriting and restructuring and editing. And so I wasn't really able to get in there and complete this project until COVID struck and I retired from my full-time job. And then I was able to learn the craft of writing memoir, or at least learn enough to be able to roll up my sleeves and get started. And so it still took years, but I now have my memoir.
Well, COVID caused a lot of writers to not be able to write, and some who became very prolific. So it really affected writers in several different ways.
For me, it was not having this ongoing to-do list that was outside of the work. So being forced to stay home when I wasn't sick or recovering from anything was really something else, and allowed me to just zero in and go deep with this project.
Well, once you completed this manuscript, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I chose a hybrid press. I still needed to be accepted by them. I'm with She Writes Press, which is a feminist press based in Berkeley. I highly recommend women who aren't sure which way to go to consider this option, because a hybrid press offers you the opportunity to get full distribution, and self-publishing does not. Going with a traditional press is great if you can do it, but as an older white woman in this moment in time without an enormous Instagram following. I was not too hopeful that I'd be able to get an agent and get a deal. And my interest at this point in my life was to get the book out there, both for my friends and family, but also for as large an audience as could appreciate it. And I absolutely have not regretted that decision.
She Writes Press is very well respected in the industry, and Brooke Warner is just, I think, the expert on teaching memoir.
She was my memoir teacher. Brooke and her partner, Linda Joy Myers, who's also an author, they work together to teach memoir writing. It's a 6-month program where you really learn the craft. And Brooke was my mentor. And over the course of that period of time, or just as we were getting to the end of the 6 months, I asked her if she would consider publishing my book. And she said, yes, under certain conditions. And I needed to hire a developmental editor, which I did. And then, of course, a copy editor and a proofreader and all of that. And I just thought that everything she was recommending that I do would make the book better. And no doubt it did.
And I've heard that the community of women writers, the cohort groups, they call them, are just wonderful to be involved with that group.
It is so special. And I hosted feminist talk shows in the 70s and 80s and a little into the 90s. And, it was really this kind of world we dreamed of where people would not be competing with one another, but rather be invested in one another's success. This all boats rise with the tide philosophy. And in being a part of the spring 2023 cohort, as I have been, we support one another. We share resources. We have Zoom meetings and help one another. I've been on panels with other She Writes Press authors at bookstores. It's really been quite an experience.
Well, in addition to being an author, you host 2 podcasts. How did you choose podcasting? And tell us more about your podcast.
It's what old radio people do. Podcasts are incredible because it's free distribution. It's essentially radio on demand. So I spent 25 years in radio, and my husband is a recording engineer, and we have a studio here at our house. So it was a natural. My first podcast was about 15 years ago when podcasts were first happening. It was even before the iPhone, I think. And that was called Good Dog. And I interviewed all different experts about dogs. And I think it was a total of 98 episodes I did of that one. Now I have All the F Words, which is co-hosted with Gabby Moskowitz, and it's called All the F Words because on each episode, Gabby and I, 2 writer friends nearly 30 years apart, who give an F about everything, talk about subjects that start with the letter F. So it could be anything from fake meat to feng shui to fundamentalism or fanaticism or feminism or anything. And my other podcast that I'm very excited about and will continue doing often well into the future is In This Story with Joanne Green. And they are my micro essays that my husband then turns into works of art by creating custom music for them. And they are under 5 minutes. Each episode is under 5 minutes, and they're nostalgic and sometimes profound and sometimes funny. But they are all the stories that didn't make it into my book.
With the recording studio in your home, will you be narrating your memoir?
Oh, I already did.
Oh, wonderful.
The audiobook is available, and it is called By Accident, A Memoir of Letting Go. It's on Audible and all the standard audiobook platforms.
What do you think is the most challenging part of your artistic process?
Rewriting, fixing, getting in there and there's a great phrase, and I actually saw a movie by this name recently called Killing Your Darlings. And we write and write and write, and then sometimes we have to just exit out, delete, and we delete something that we worked on and developed and really cared about. I originally set out to write what's called a braided memoir, where the main story of my journey after being hit by a car as a pedestrian was going to be every other chapter. And then the other chapters would be other stories from my life, flashbacks from my childhood or crazy stories from my rock and roll radio career in San Francisco. But it didn't work. The structure just did not work. So much of what I wrote never made it into the book. And that's painful and tough. But, I really relied on the expertise of others to advise me, and came to understand why things weren't working and what it was going to take. I couldn't imagine getting there, but I got there.
Does your family support your career as a writer? Sometimes when we write memoir, we touch on lots of difficult subjects in families.
I'm not sure I could have written this book if my mother, father, sister, and brother were still alive. All four of them have passed on. On the one hand. On the other hand, I think that it would be tremendously meaningful to them to have been able to read it and to be able to see what I learned from them. My husband was phenomenally supportive, and my two adult sons were as well. One of my sons chose to change his name in the book, and just for privacy reasons, he and his wife and their daughter changed their names, and that's fine. So they chose their names, and but they both of my sons, right from the beginning and throughout the process, said, "This is your story. Can't be wrong. It's yours. It's your perspective."
I know you had the time during the pandemic to write, but what actually inspired you at that time to write your memoir?
I had started it long before the pandemic, and I had an incredible 10-year period in my life. And when I came out the other side, I realized that this was the book that I needed to write. And so I began working on it, and many false starts, or maybe they weren't even false starts. Just I began working on it, and it wasn't until I resigned from my job and had all that time to really focus on it. It wasn't until then that I made major progress.
Well, we writers like to write. We don't like to promote ourselves and do publicity, but you had many years of being on radio and promoting. So did you find any publicity that's worked for you to promote your book, or maybe something you tried that didn't work?
I feel very fortunate that I have a certain comfort in standing in front of groups and speaking. Podcasts are really my wheelhouse. So being on other people's podcasts, as we're doing right now, for me is a total pleasure and fun. I look forward to being interviewed. And then just throughout my career, I have been on kind of both sides of the fence when it comes to this sort of thing. So I understand. I've been a programmer at a nonprofit where I got to interview authors, where I got to put on programs. So I really know what people who book events want to hear. I think that I've really been doing all my own publicity. And I studied a lot. There were so many different webinars you can take, and things online where you can learn what does it take to launch a book successfully. And so I took lots of notes and learned that I needed to develop an author platform, which was what the two podcasts were all about. I have a website. I have a newsletter. So all of that has been very helpful. And then, it costs a lot of money to do all of this, as writers know, right? You pay for all your own marketing and publicity. So I've had to be judicious and really cautious about where I'm going to invest money and where I'm going to invest time. And, the balance between, for instance, being interviewed on a podcast or booking an event at a bookstore, what kind of results am I going to get from one versus the other? But it's not a science. It's really more of an art. So, we just toss things up on the wall and see what sticks.
I agree. I think we have to use blocks and build a stack of blocks on each other, and hopefully, someone will pick up one of those blocks and want to look at it, because they say it takes 7 times for someone to look at an ad or look at a book cover or look at something that will entice them to read our book before they actually make the purchase.
I know that's discouraging.
It really is. And especially that there are 2 million titles published in the US every year is difficult to get your voice out there to be heard.
It is, but I'm so heartened by the response that I've been getting, both from people I know and many whom I don't. And my goal really was that I wanted to share some of the things that I learned about how to move through life's challenges with some grace and what I call post-traumatic growth. So it turns out I'm hearing that my book is helping people as they go through diagnoses or injuries or losses. And that makes me feel like everything was worth it.
That makes me think of my question that I enjoy hearing from authors is, what does success look like to you personally?
I feel very successful because I had a vision, I embarked on it, and I didn't quit. And I'm proud of the final product. And having been in radio, everything I did was gone in a minute. This, is something that sticks around and hopefully will remain. And I feel proud to say that this is a big part of my legacy.
That's exactly the word I use about my work, is legacy. And I think even if it's just for our family and friends, we've gotten it out in the world and it will outlive us. And if it helps those people that don't know you, those strangers who pick it up and find something valuable in it, then so much the better. One of my favorite things to happen about my book was that one of my granddaughters chose it to read in high school when they had to choose a book to read. She said, "My grandmother wrote this book." And I was just so thrilled about that, because it is a legacy.
That's great. Maybe my granddaughter will do the same. She's 4.5 right now. So
she's got a little way to go, but she will, and she'll be so proud of you. And
she knows I wrote a book, so that's a start.
Yes. Well, you may have to write a children's book for her. Tell us a little bit about the passages that you've brought to share today, and then read so that we can hear your tone and voice.
Sure. My book begins with a traumatic accident, and I'll read just the first 2 paragraphs, and then I'm going to skip to the beginning of the second chapter. I'll start with this just to give you a sense. As I step into the crosswalk, there's a sudden deafening sound. An explosion, maybe? Then I'm airborne, thrown onto the hood of a car. What the hell? I silently scream to the universe, or God, or no one. Seriously? All I can hear is an ear-splitting cacophony. All I feel is wild, uncontrolled movement. Stop the car, stop the car. The car is catapulted down North San Pedro Road, my head banging against its windshield. I slip off the hood onto the ground, alive.
Wow.
So that's how the book
grabbed
begins.
us from the beginning.
Well, I hope so. So obviously, spoiler alert, I survived and here I am. But the first chapter goes on to, it takes you right through the scene. I'm on the ground in the street. Who comes up to me? The police officer, ultimately the paramedics. And then we call my husband. He meets me at the hospital, and I whisper, "I'm sorry," to him, because even as it says here in the book, even in my altered state, that phone call he just received was his greatest nightmare. This is because when my husband was 7, his parents were killed by a drunk driver in a car accident. So I tell that whole story. And then this, what I'm going to read now, which really gives you some foreshadowing of what the rest of the book is about. Being hit by a car is not my first blow, although it's probably the most literal, and it won't be my last, but it will be a catalyst for me, a sudden graphic stop to my constantly in motion existence, my need to produce and achieve to feel worthy of love, my need to control everything because I've believed that it would make me safer. It will be the test that finally teaches me that my needs are masks and that control is an illusion. I've had plenty of opportunities, losses, hard ones, to learn to let go, but I grieved my losses and went right back to my old ways. The accident has stripped me, made me totally dependent on others, put cracks in my bones, and revealed cracks in my armor. I can't go back to my old ways, not easily anyway. Over time and through a series of other physical and emotional challenges, I will discover that losing control can be the best way to truly gain it. Letting go means letting in light, revealing my real power, and finally feeling that deep sense of peace that I'd been desperate to find.
Joanne, that is so intuitive. I mean, that is just, I think you've snatched my life and summed it up right there. That was beautiful.
My hope is that people will see themselves in my book. And that is kind of what's happening. I mean, obviously, we're all different and our journeys are all very, very different. Our cultural backgrounds are different. Our experiences are different. But there are certain qualities or challenges that we women of a certain age have faced or continue to face, trying to be all things to all people. I'm sure that resonates with you and many of your listeners. And the older I get, the more I realize that that's not possible, number one. And it's really, our job is really to understand ourselves fully and be our best selves. And that is not about pleasing everyone else. It is really about being true and authentic to ourselves. So if some of those are your issues, you will find yourself in By Accident.
Well, I certainly will have to read it, because being in control and producing and thinking we're in control when we're really not, those are all my issues as well.
Here's what I learned, that we can't control what happens to us in life, but we can control how we respond. And how we respond is critical, because stuff's going to happen. Losses will happen, injury, illness, failures, all of it will happen inevitably. And there are things we tell ourselves every day that in some cases don't serve us. Things like, who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? All of that, not helpful. What is helpful, what was helpful for me after the accident, was to say, I can do this. And I said it from the very beginning, and I don't know where that came from. It was like my inner survivor, maybe from my ancestors who were immigrants and left where they were for a better life and had no idea where they were going or how to speak the language or anything else. But I drew upon their strength, I think. And I just said, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. And eventually I started believing it.
Well, you're a strong woman.
I'd say so. At this point, I feel that way.
I'm always interested in knowing what memoirists edit out of their book. What didn't make the cut? What couldn't you include in the memoir?
Many stories that were profound in building who I am today, but they didn't necessarily relate to the themes I was working on. So that's one thing for sure. Also, people say this is a love letter to my husband. I've been told that, and I suppose on some level it is. We're best friends. We definitely have what I would say is a great marriage. However, it isn't perfect. And I think I left out a lot of the things that aren't perfect. But I didn't paint a completely perfect picture either. So it's realistic and it's authentic, but I certainly didn't share all the struggles we had in raising our kids. Wasn't relevant to the story.
Are there any specific books or seminars or writing retreats or groups that you can share that improved your writing journey?
Well, I would say for anybody interested in writing memoir, I would absolutely encourage them to look into the Brooke Warner and Linda Joy Myers' How to Write a Memoir in 6 Months. That was tremendously helpful for me. And they offer other things as well. Writing groups, I think, are absolutely helpful. And I joined a group called Writers Near and Far. Just it's a private group that was put together, but the women are from all over the world. And we met every week starting at the beginning of the pandemic. Now we meet twice a month. And we write to a prompt. And so many of the micro essays that appear in my podcast in this story are from my writing group. And most of us have never met in person. And yet we feel that we've gotten to know each other intimately by sharing our writing all this time. And we don't criticize each other's work. We just appreciate it. But that act of having to write something initially every week and now twice a month has been great and sort of keeps me on track and keeps me creating.
Do you have another book in you?
I don't know. At this point, if I were to have to wager a guess, I would say if there were to be a second book, it would be a compilation of my essays rather than another memoir. I'm absolutely not going to embark on fiction writing. I have great respect for novelists and for memoirists who give it a try, but that's definitely not on my to-do list. And I'm going to continue writing these short essays, whether they end up in a book or whether they remain as audio projects. That remains to be seen. But at any rate, they are getting out there into the world, and people are enjoying them. And my husband and I collaborate on them, and it's just been a joy at this stage of our life to work on these projects together, because we started out working together in radio. That's how we met.
That's wonderful that you can continue then, and that wonderful long marriage. Very unusual in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, so I hear. Well, it takes work, as we've always told our children. A good marriage, a good relationship doesn't just happen. You need to prioritize it and offer it a lot of care and feeding.
Well, you have certainly found success there.
Thank you.
Joanne, as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite a unique set. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
Well, 50 is very young. I did not come out with my first book until I was 69. So I think, what do they say? 70 is the new 50, 50 is the new 30, something like that. I feel like writing is a wonderful thing to do later in life because you can you can always do it. I mean, even if you have physical limitations, you're able to do it. If you're not able to see, you can dictate, right? There's just, and there are so many tools available today. For me, in my earlier radio career, there was no internet. So doing research was laborious and time consuming. Whereas now, my goodness, any question I had, boom, 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 and the answer's right there. So I encourage anyone and everyone who wants to express themselves through the written word to give it a try. And there are so many women out there, including myself, who are available for consultation to help and offer advice and counsel. And, my website, I'm sure it's going to be, you've got it listed somewhere, and all of this material. I encourage people to reach out, and I'd be happy to offer any assistance that I could, because as I said earlier, all boats rise with the tide. And I think older women have so much accumulated wisdom to share, and we should be sharing it.
It's so important. Today's my 69th birthday, and I wrote a couple of books a couple of years ago. So I'm interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who are still writing beautiful work. I think it's kind of like swimming. We can do it the rest of our lives. And so we're just excited that you are here to share your journey with us, and your memoir is going to be an important one for everyone to read. So thank you for being here. And we're happy to say that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia. And I'm really honored to celebrate your 69th birthday with you today. We are the same age.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.